this is, that negative thought you've been having, and I just can't let you try and change yourself without a fight. So, go ahead and just turn the show off, okay? And, yeah, everything's still fine.
This is Blindsight with your host, Bill Lundgren, an AINC original podcast.
You serious?
We're not holding back truth. We're here to help you heal and become the best you possible. Here's the chair. Here's the pillow. Here's Bill.
Hi there. Welcome to Blindsight, the podcast from Audio Information Network of Colorado, which is your feature on the subject of mental health and people with blindness. We're happy to have you on board today, and I'm really particularly happy to have introduced my guest for today's session. But before I do that, I just want to remind those of you in the Denver, Boulder area, there's a fundraising concert coming up with Diane Shore, a wonderful, wonderful singer and performer, which will be a fundraiser for Audio Information Network of Colorado. It will be Thursday, March 4th. Doors open at 5 o'clock. Though I advise you to get your tickets now through the AIN of Colorado website, and will be a great night called In Darkness, because the guests will all be blindfolded and the performers are all blind. So it should be a fun evening, and keep that in mind. We'll be down at 2102 Arapahoe Avenue in Denver and at the Masterpiece Theater. So anyway, on to our program. I am delighted to present you Dr. Kathy Cudlett, who is been a history professor at UC Davis, and most recently just retired as the director of the Paul Longmore Institute on Disabilities, and has been a distinguished lecturer both here in this country and in Europe on the issue of disabilities, and also has written a number of books on people that we normally wouldn't know about who've been blind, and, in some of their actions have made a difference in the world. So, Kathy, welcome to Blindsight.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. And I wanted to, as I often do, ask you a personal question. What made you decide to get involved in history as a career, and particularly the type of history that you've focused on, which has to do with blindness and disabilities? A lot of stereotypes around people who are professionals in the field of history as being kind of stodgy and, wearing sensible shoes and kind of like dull to be with. And I know you're not that, but what made you get into it?
Well, let's see. The history part is a fairly easy answer. I was doing my junior year abroad in France and went to history lecture there for a class that I was having as part of my program, and really fell in love with French history there. And I'd been excited by history before that because of teachers. So I had a wonderful professor when I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz. And I just got really, really motivated. I just wanted to know more. I never considered myself a history nerd, but I loved stories and storytelling, and I loved hearing how people talked about things that I didn't know about in the past. And so it became this way for me to burrow into worlds that I didn't know existed. So that was really exciting.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for the blind history piece, that took longer to mature and develop. And And that requires me to kind of pull back a little bit and talk about my own history. I was born with cataracts at a time when they couldn't do much about cataracts. And so I didn't see anything till I was about 9 months old when my dad took a picture with a camera and I reacted to the flash. And so they rushed me around to various doctors and they performed a number of surgeries over the course of my life that made my sight better, made me have sight actually, then made it better, but it was never that great. So I was always in this in-between place. I was never not seeing anything, but I was always seeing badly. And so I've avoided blind people. I was terrified of them. That was the path I didn't go on. That was the scary, place that other people went, and I was rescued from that. And so I just pushed back on that narrative a lot and didn't want to be associated with it at all. I went through my entire graduate school career in basic denial. Kind of, even though my vision wasn't great, I used magnifiers. I tried every trick in the book to get things done, but not having to read as much and, not having to ask for help, all of those things. And then I got a teaching job at Barnard College. And long story short, they asked me how I would teach a class to students, a large lecture class, how I would teach that to students if I had a vision impairment. So me, who's in denial, and it's like, oh, I have a vision impairment, right. It didn't occur to me that people would hold that against me, even though I was holding it against myself half the time. I allowed these people to kind of, stomp all over me, and I got really angry. I just, I was furious, and I said, I am not going to be a victim here. And they'd asked me if I would, the Barnard faculty asked me if I would give a lecture to a large class to show them how I would do it. And I never lectured to a large class before. No sighted person had ever lectured to a large class before, and nobody that was sighted was asked to do that. And so I was angry. And essentially it was a wake-up moment for me. And I said, well, something, if I'm going to be condemned for, having no vision or not being capable, I'm going to go the other direction, and I'm going to prove to people that this is not what blindness is. Anyway, so I ended up saying, I'm going to study blind people. I want to understand what their history was, because I was doing history of medicine already. I'd been really interested in the history of epidemics. This was way, 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 way pre-COVID. But I was really interested in that. And I thought, oh, it's a nice little bridge over to history of medicine, from history of medicine to history of blind people, disabled people, all of that. Very long answer, but it gives you a lot to work with, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. But I imagine when you started, you must have thought, like a lot of people do, there isn't much history there. It's like, It's almost like we've discovered blindness recently.
Yes, no, that's a really excellent point, because, most people just sort of say, first of all, blind people, how many are there? Second of all, they're not very articulate. That's the belief. They didn't have any positions of power. They didn't have any information. They were either victims or, just kind of marginal to everything. And the trick for me was to understand that you need to think about blind people within the context of all kinds of other things happening historically, and not just related to blindness. So it could be related to gender, it could be related to race, it could be related to the growth of cities, it could be related to how education was formed. All of those things, blind people are right there, and they're making noise, they're changing things, they're doing stuff, but nobody thought to look, except for in a few cases at a few maybe exceptional blind people that had either invented something or become famous musicians or a couple of scientists, but they were very rare and it didn't apply to most people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Most people didn't think that. Most people, Siri's telling me, I'm not sure I understand. So Siri, just listen up. So anyway, I, started to dig in a little bit, and I had skills from my other kind of historical research from writing my doctorate and then my first book, which was about cholera epidemics. So I knew where to look for people that you weren't used to finding. I met people in France who were doing some of this work, and I bonded with them. There was a colleague that I ended up writing a book with in France who was really deep in with the history of blind people in France, and that just blew my mind. I just learned so much, and it was so exciting, both to learn about it and also to work with her to write a book together. And I can talk about that book if you want. It's the history of this really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what happened was I was in the archives looking for, just evidence of blind people, and I came across this little pamphlet. And it was on the history. It said reflections on the physical and moral condition of the blind. And it gave this woman's name. Her name was Adele Husson, Huss, as in Sam, O-N. And so I was like, wow, what is this? And the archivist was helping me read the handwriting and all of that. And so I was transcribing it. And then my friend that I talked to about blind history, whose name is Zina, Z-I-N-A, and the last name is Weygand, W-E-Y-G-A-N-D. I started talking to her about it, and we had this conversation. She said, I found that same pamphlet, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. It's just, she's clearly this really interesting woman. It was from 1820. That's more or less 1822, around then. So really early in history of blind people for most people. And she'd written this little pamphlet about how blind people should behave and how they, especially girls, and nobody had written about blind girls very much at all. And she was giving advice to her, what she called her comrades of misfortune. And so her kind of fellow travelers, which I love the term comrades of misfortune. I just think we should appropriate that and really run with it and make it our own and all of that. But Adele, wrote about, how to tell the difference between fabrics, what it means to listen to music, how she imagines what stars are. All of these kind of reflections that she had, and then she has this whole part at the end, the second half of the book is all about blind women's marriage prospects. And so she just digs in and starts thinking about how blind women should not get married, because if they marry a sighted guy, he's going to just take advantage of her and he's not going to be interested anyway. If she marries a blind guy, Adele says, then she will become, really desperate because he won't have any prospects. She won't have any prospects, all of this. And again, this is 1820 and all of this.
Yeah.
So, however, long story short, we ended up digging in to try to figure out who this Adele Husson was. We found out, we've had a chance encounter, with a document that made the connection for us. It turned out she did get married. She did get married to a blind guy. She went on to publish about 12 novels before she died at the age of 29 in a fire. And the novels are all terrible, but they sold pretty well. She was writing to this sort of moralistic audience of the 1820s in France. So she's trying to ingratiate herself with the religious officials at the time and trying to do all that. For your audience
like the
members,
conservatives.
Yes, exactly. For the audience, for people that do want to read this book, you can. It should be on Bookshare. bookshare.org. It's also available. That's probably your best bet, Bookshare. It came out a long time ago. It came out in 2002, so it's been out a while. But it's really a great read. You get her thoughts, Adele's, and then how we piece together the detective story of finding who she was and what her true life was like.
Well, the question I had was, was she talking from experience about her negativity of being married to a blind guy?
So no, I don't think so. I mean, we don't know details about her life. She married a blind musician, inventor. And what's interesting, the other piece of this is that she, in her writing, says blind men should get married, just not blind women, because if blind men marry a sighted woman, they'll take care of him. And so that would be the great thing. But if he marries a blind woman, it's just not going to be that great. So her husband, Adele, and we believe they had one and perhaps two children. We believe that Adele and the children perished in the fire. But the husband survived the fire and went on to marry a sighted woman who took care of him. So I guess she kind of maybe knew what she was talking about. I don't know. But I don't know any details about their relationship. People didn't talk about that kind of stuff in the early 19th century, so we don't know.
I'm sure they don't really even acknowledge that someone happens to be blind, or just hide them away.
Right. Well, see, the thing was, they were trying to get one of the things was, and one of the reasons she wrote this piece was she was trying to get a residency, to get a place to live in a enclave for blind people that allowed blind people to live in it, supported them, and gave them meals and some charity. And they were very, very, very poor. And so she was trying to make money from her writing, but that could only go so far. And they didn't let her in because somebody said, and we have the petition that says this, she wrote her petition to try to get admitted there, and somebody had scrawled in the margin, "This woman is a schemer, don't let her in." And so it was interesting.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have let her live there. They wouldn't have let them live there as a blind married couple, I don't think. So, it's one of those. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, tell me more, because you've done a lot of research in this area. And it's fascinating to hear these kinds of stories from 1820. Now, Louis Braille was when?
He was about the same time, and it's likely that they met. We figured out that he definitely knew her husband, and he definitely interacted because they both did stuff at the
Okay, so we're talking
school.
You're talking about certainly he was a major figure in the blindness movement.
No, he wasn't. That's the thing. Louis Braille wasn't a major figure among blind people, except for like the 10 or so that he interacted with at the Institute of Blind Youth in Paris. And so he was busy, kind of perfecting his system, working with people, whatever. Nobody'd heard of Louis Braille. He was very modest, very low key. The invention of Braille was a very kind of probably more collaborative than the stories typically tell it. That he probably tried it and gave it to his fellow students, and they corrected and made suggestions and all of that. And so Louis Braille was not this big chest thumping like, "Here I am, I'm here to save us." He was just kind of quietly saying, we need a way to read that's more practical than, just raised print letters. And there's, stories about how he worked to improve the system based on hearing a lecture by a general, one of Napoleon's generals, about tactile writing, and that gave Louis Braille the idea, wow, maybe there's something more we could do with this. And
Interesting.
people had come up with all kinds of systems for blind people to write, and some of them were very informal and just, it's in a single household, somebody worked with somebody to do something, or in a particular region, maybe people learned a few things, but they didn't, have Braille until it spread more in the 1870s, 1880s. And Louis Braille died in 1852. So he wasn't there spreading his system. It's just that it was taking root among people that were in a position to show it to others. And, it kind of snowballed after that.
So he never got to be appreciated in his lifetime for what he did.
I think people know that he wasn't. I mean, he was appreciated as a teacher at the school and somebody that had a really good idea. And I think there were people that saw the potential there, but I don't think anybody dreamed that it would, be a worldwide communication system, or transcription system, I should say. Nobody knew that then. It was just more, one of these many things, including general literacy in European history and in French history in particular, where students that were sighted were learning to read and write for the first time, many of them. Up until the end of the, around 1900, most sighted people were not that literate. They didn't know how to read and write. That would be, that was taking root and taking off, but it would take time. And so blind people were going through a similar process. It's not that different where they were catching up to the sighted people. It wasn't that at all. It was part of a big movement in the world and in European and especially French society to make sure that everybody was educated so that they could become good workers, good citizens. They could, be good little French citizens, basically.
Well, so was France kind of like a bedrock to the blindness community in terms of what was happening, or was this happening independently?
It was, but it was because it was the place that formed an institution to educate blind people. Up until this Institute of Blind Youth was formed it was right before the French Revolution, basically. It was formed in the 1780s. And it was formed by a sighted guy named Valentin Hauy, Hauy. And he wanted to bring blind people together to educate them. And this was the time of the Enlightenment. So he was a big champion of education for everybody, and he wanted blind people to be educated too. So he formed this school. He brought together blind people from France, or people in the Paris region. He, started publicizing it, and the school eventually took off in France. And what happened was that leaders, or sighted people in other countries, especially the United States, Germany, Russia, saw what was happening in France and saw it as a model. So they copied it. They came and visited. And of course, if there was no internet or, any kind of massive communication, so people traveled and they'd do the little circuit. They'd go to the school and they'd watch students read. They'd watch students perform, and then they'd take the ideas back to their own schools and share it with blind people there. So it was very kind of informal and slow. It was slow to take off, I think, but it laid the groundwork.
How did it transfer over to the United States in that same time when everybody else was looking at France, kind of originating in France and then Americans discovering it? Is that how they...
Right. So yeah, France was considered kind of the like cool place in the 19th century. In the 1800s, everybody wanted a piece of France. They went there for medical school. They went there for finding out what was cool in terms of art and writing and all of that. So France was the thing. And one of the people that thought France was pretty interesting was Samuel Gridley Howe, Howe, who toured. He was in Europe a lot, and he came and he visited the school and was influenced by it, and came back to the United States and formed the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. That was the first American institution for blind people. And so word spread around the country about educating blind people. And so people would either send their kids there, they would read about it in newspapers. Charles Dickens was great at publicizing it. And the thing that was interesting is when people toured, when there were tourists in the 19th century, one of the things they did was go to these institutions and visit them. They would go and see, like, oh, wow, let's go see the blind people. Let's go see what they're learning. And isn't that cool? And they'd write about it, and they'd write letters home, or they'd write articles in the newspaper, all of that. And Charles Dickens, the novelist, was one of the people that toured Perkins and thought, wow, this is pretty darn cool. And he wrote about it. He met Laura Bridgman, who was a student there, Bridgman, and she was the first blind deaf person to be educated, in a public way at Perkins. Samuel Gridley Howe made her his kind of project, and she became kind of this poster child for Perkins until Helen Keller came along. And Helen Keller's mom had read Charles Dickens' account of this education of Laura Bridgman. And so she thought, cool, I'm going to get Laura, the people that educated Laura, to educate my daughter. If Perkins must be onto something, if they can educate this deaf-blind Laura Bridgman, they can educate my deaf-blind Helen Keller too. And so they did. Helen Keller, first teacher, Anne Sullivan, who everybody's heard of, who came from Perkins, and she traveled to the South. Helen Keller was from Alabama, and she went to Alabama and educated Helen Keller at home. I guess it's one of the early cases of homeschooling. I'm not sure. But anyway, so Helen Keller became sort of the poster child for Perkins then. And that showed a lot of other blind people that, this can really happen.
Well, has France remained kind of a leader in the blindness, or have they sort of rested on their laurels? I mean, you've been to, you've lectured in Paris numerous times, and what have you seen there as compared to what we have in this country?
It's very retro now. The United States, I think, took the lead more. And the other thing that happened for blind people was mainstreaming. And so in the United States, that was especially popular. And so rather than put blind people in their own institutions, it became more and more common to have them educated along with sighted people in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s as less of a form of isolation. So the blind people in the 1960s were not likely to have been in an institution as much. The United States, I think, where it excelled in ways that France didn't, was there was a movement from within blind people themselves to promote a blind identity and a blind education, all of those things, and things like National Federation of the Blind. I don't usually make that mistake. The American Council of the Blind. These organizations run by and for blind people really bubbled up from within the unique cultural world of the United States. In some of it's rooted in racial politics, some of it's rooted in civil rights and working class history, all of that. It's all kind of part of the American dream in a way to push back and to educate the common person. Whereas in France, it remained, the benevolent sighted people doing something for those poor blind people. And it never got out of that. And even the blindness organizations that formed in France, they either copied the American organizations and it didn't go well, or they just thought, we don't need this. We don't, let's just be individuals. We don't need to join groups anyway. And so the whole politics of it in France was very different, very paternalistic. And that always gives me the heebie-jeebies when I go over to France. I love France. I'm a French historian through and through. I'm married to a French woman. I'm all of these things. But I cannot stand the paternalism. It just drives me nuts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which may be true in a lot of concerns about people with disabilities in general, that kind of paternalism.
Yep.
I remember when I've gone down to Mexico, it's like the little old ladies in black mantillas who would cross themselves when they see me,
Yeah, that happened to me in
to
France.
prevent the evil eye.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, I've got the evil eye. But it's we're fortunate in this country. What do you, Hal was really the one who got it all started in the United States, because we don't talk much about him. We talk about Perkins, but not him personally, and having that kind of foresight to, kind of work and get out of that paternalistic model.
Well, it's more complicated. I think Howe himself was complicated. I think he used people, and especially people like Laura Bridgman. He didn't do this for altruism to help propel blind people into a state of independence. He wanted blind people to be educated, but he was also a fundraiser, a showman, all of those things. So, he needed blind people as much as they needed him. And, it's very, very clear that until the movements from within within blind people themselves came to be part of American society, I think American society had a similar sense of paternalism and all of that compared to the, it was like France in a lot of ways. The thing that changed the United States, I think, was civil rights, self-determination, independence that was kind of rooted in an idea that Americans need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages of that ideology because, in France, your average blind person is better taken care of by the system, by a social safety net. United States, So, it's, you get a few things here and you lose a few things. So I think it'd be great to have a combo. I'm not sure Canada is it, but it could be. But, you have the French ideas of taking care of people in a society and the American ideas of independence. But I think it's complicated there as well. So, But yeah.
So it's creating a balance between the two.
Sure.
Between being taken care of, but at the same time not having being taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. And to give somebody the desire and the ability, if they want it, to really not have to depend on others for help. And I think what happens in France is that it's just assumed that you're going to need it. And, and some people do need it. And the people that need it should be able to get it. But I think we should all be presented with the option of having independence and also having the notion of being taken care of. And I would say that's true for sighted people too. I don't think it's just a blind thing. Let me add that in all caps.
True. That part of the fight that's going on currently in terms of how much do we do for people and how much don't we do for people, and depends on which side of the fence you're on. We're still fighting that battle and probably will for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's at the core. It's at the core of American, what it means to be American, and I think that's another way that blind people are just another example of forces that are already in existence for everybody.
Mm-hmm. This has been fascinating. And unfortunately, I'm finding that our time has very rapidly come to an end. But I'm hoping that I'd like to continue this conversation at some point with you, Kathy, if you're up for it.
Absolutely, sure.
But I really appreciate your being on and contributing your information to our audience. And, those of you who are listening, who want to make some comments, certainly don't hesitate to contact the Audio Information Network of Colorado through our email, and give us your feedback, and particularly some ideas of people you'd like to hear. We certainly would welcome that. But for you, Kathy, thank you very, very much for a very interesting time on this program. And I will say to all of you in the audience, thank you for tuning in. This is Blindsight, your host, Bill Lundgren, and until next time.